Blade Runner 2049 is full of shots like these. Beautiful, massive, expensive. Many of these shots were done by building full-scale sets in massive studios. But for the first Blade Runner back in 1982, they built miniatures of huge cities to make the world feel bigger. Which gave me an idea. Let's use miniatures to recreate 3 iconic shots from Blade Runner 2049, all done in my garage. This is a massive project, so I'll need to split this up into 3 separate videos, tackling 1 shot per video. And we'll start with this one. The good news about this one is that we have behind the scenes of what it looked like on set. So we just have to shrink it down to get our miniature. And there's really no other place to start than the dirt. We can't use real dirt though, because it'll look too big on camera. So in the past, we've used cocoa powder, which is what we're using here too. And this mini Batman will stand in for Ryan Gosling. This is only the first step to making a convincing miniature though. Next, we need to adjust our camera. One of the dead giveaways that this is a miniature is the depth of field. See how everything in front of and behind Batman is out of focus? Well, in the full scale, this isn't happening, so we'll need to close our aperture. This will make everything appear more in focus, but also means less light reaches the sensor, and everything appears darker. We're going to need a lot more light to film this, and that takes us to our third step, lighting. Looking at the behind the scenes again, I'm seeing a lot of light from above. So we'll use an Amaran F22C, which is a large 2 foot by 2 foot flexible LED panel, which will be perfect for this. I'm also seeing this bar of lights shining towards the camera, which reminded me of the Amaran T2C LED tube. You might be wondering why all these lights are set to white when the shot is very obviously orange. And that's because we can do that in color grading. Finally, to get this wall of light, we're gonna need a lot of haze. And now, the miniature is really starting to look like the original. But of course, this Batman is only a placeholder. We're going to need a full-size walking human for the final shot. And that means we're gonna need to turn to compositing. Compositing for this shot just means separating a person from its original environment and placing them into a new one, like our miniature. The most common example is a green screen, but since this is a silhouette, we can just use a white background and it'll work all the same. I did this whole compositing thing for the Batman, and it's not honestly that difficult to do, as long as the camera's not moving. But because the camera is moving, it makes the whole shot so much more difficult, and that's why this shot alone is a full video. Now, you may be wondering why I'm not just using some sort of 3D program like Blender to accomplish this shot. Honestly, it would be a lot easier and cheaper, but I don't know how. But I'm learning using today's sponsor, Skillshare. Ever since I started making films 9 years ago, VFX have always been extremely daunting, and I've wanted to tackle it for a long time. But approaching 2025, marking 10 years, my New Year's resolution was to finally get comfortable with VFX by learning Blender. And Skillshare has been extremely helpful with this because they have Blender classes aimed at beginners like myself, which is what I've been going through. But once I've kind of learned the basics, I can move on to some more advanced classes like this one, which is specifically geared towards filmmakers. Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives, so no matter what your interests are, they probably have a class for you. Maybe you're wanting to get started in Premiere, or you're wanting to improve your screenplay writing, or you want to reach YouTube success with MKBHD, which sounds really interesting, so I'm gonna have to save that one for later. I've always been curious to try Skillshare, so if you're curious like me, then now is your opportunity, because the first 500 people to click my link in the description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare. Thank you, Skillshare, for supporting the channel. And now we have to go back to figuring out how we're going to do this camera move. And spoiler, it's going to involve some math. What they're doing in this shot is called a dolly in. It means the camera is actually moving forward, and it's quite a bit different than zooming in. This is a zoom in, this is a dolly in. And the reason dollying is such a problem is because when it comes to compositing, everything needs to match. From like camera height to the distance from the camera to lighting and to camera movement. Here's an example. If I dolly in on the full scale, but I don't on the miniature, it looks like the actor is just sliding across the ground. Like I said earlier, we can't just fix this by zooming. So we need to dolly on both shots, but if there's a mismatch in speed, then we still get sliding. What makes this all even trickier though is that both shots are at different scales. We'll need to scale all these things down for the miniature proportionally, mathematically. Don't worry, it's fairly easy math. We just need to figure out the size of the miniature, which is easy. We just measure it. And then we gotta figure out the size of the full scale, which we can't measure, so we're gonna have to do some calculated guessing. We then take the distance measurement of the full scale, divide it by the distance measurement of the miniature, and we have our scale ratio. This is a mess, but ultimately I determined that our miniature is 1/6 scale. And these are all the measurements for how to shoot the miniature. Oh, and yeah, we're gonna double the size of the miniature. But there's one more thing to think about here. Lens choice. The focal length should be the same between the two shots, but what focal length is this shot? For Blade Runner 2049, they used these lenses, ARRI Master Primes, which are some of the most high quality but also the most expensive lenses out there, and cover a ton of focal lengths, so we're gonna have to take a guess as to what focal length they're using for Blade Runner. DZOFILM sent me out this set of Arles lenses, which is perfect for this project, since these lenses are a little sharper and cleaner than ones I've used before. These lenses also look and feel a little bit more professional. I mean, look at this, look at the size of this. They have 10 focal lengths for the Arles series, but I got a case of 5 here. I'd probably say 35 might be our best bet. There really isn't any way to know for sure, but as long as we remain consistent between the miniature and the full scale using the same lens, it should match okay. And finally, now we'll need to somehow precisely dolly both shots at the same exact speed by hand. Something that normally only robots would do. The original shot is 9 seconds long, and we need to move the camera a total of 9 feet, 1.5 feet for the miniature. If we just set a starting and stopping point and then do the move over 9 seconds, there's no way to know if we did it at a consistent rate. I might have started really fast and ended really slow. Then there's no way to know if it's going to match the shot of the other scale. So instead, I figured we could use a metronome and set a marker for every second. That would reduce our margin of error by a lot. And since the metronome is audible, we'll want to make hitting our marks audible as well. Somehow. Still figuring that one out, but I think we have enough to move forward with shooting. We realized that in order to build such a massive miniature, we were going to need to move everything to the floor. So we briefly went shopping for materials. And then began building. I made all these measurements ahead of time, but it's another thing to see such a big miniature. Our lighting would also have to scale up. So for the overhead this time, we added a shower curtain to soften the light and cover more area. We added another tube for a backlight, this time a T4C, which is a 4-foot tube, so it'll cover more of the set. And then of course, bigger means that we'll need more light. So we also added an Amran 150C to the setup, and that means it's time to create our landscape. The first miniature test we did used 1 container of cocoa powder. For this one, we needed 6 more, and then we had to cover the entire surface. The landscape from the original shot is really flat, with a few rough spots here and there. I used a dowel and went over the landscape again, and again, and again, to flatten it all out. Every time I pass over, something could go wrong, and it's done. Oh my goodness! It took quite a bit of time. The original shot also has that wall of all-consuming haze in the background. So to create something similar, we grabbed my smoke machine and filled up my entire garage. I can't see a thing. Oh my goodness. I have never been in a room this foggy before in my life. To get the movement exactly right, we needed an audible way to line up the camera move with the metronome. So Andrew added pegs to a board to mark out every 2 inches. And as per my brother's recommendation, we're going to use a playing card. That's my best idea. In the end, this miniature took us until 10 p.m. But the end result was more than worth the effort. I was feeling pretty nervous that this all wouldn't work.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Is the counting help or no?
Not exactly.
Okay.
It was fun though.
But math is math. So as long as I mathed correctly, it will work. We just had human error to contend with. And oh boy, was there human error.
Oh, careful. It has to go higher.
Goodness.
We're sort of just filming something, and we don't know when we've got it. So I just need to find the best takes, and then we gotta film it full scale, and we gotta hope that it actually matches up.
It's time for the moment of truth. The plan for this one is to have me walk through the garage. We're lighting the back wall to create the separation we'll need for compositing, and then light the ceiling to give me an ambient light above. For the camera, we need to set it up outside on the road to get the right distance, as well as a flat surface. Relatively flat surface. We made some adjustments, but I'll have to stabilize that shakiness in post. I got into costume, we set up the metronome, and began filming.
Action!
Just like with the miniature, the plan was to get a bunch of takes with the hope of one being perfect. So by the end of the night, we couldn't be sure if we had it. But I just needed one.
Nice turnaround there.
It's very dramatic.
It's crazy how well this all worked for just being all filmed in my garage. And we're just getting started. Subscribe to see the next 2 recreations from Blade Runner.